Hello and welcome to one of our regular parliamentary editions of Hot Topic. Reporting to us from Westminster this week, Martin Vickers, Conservative MP for Cleethorpes and Immingham. Martin, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Busy month, February in Parliament. You've been particularly active talking about floods. You initiated an adjournment debate in January. Since then, of course, the south of England has suffered horribly.
Yes, I mean, my point was obviously to get on record the concerns of my constituents in the Barton, Barrowhaven, New Holland area. It was mainly Barrowhaven that had suffered in the tidal surge at the beginning of September. And I was anxious to make sure that the Minister and through him the Environment Agency were fully aware of the continuing concerns of my constituents, and to make sure that we are not left behind, since so much has happened since that surge.
Well, it can be devastating. In 6 weeks this year, Somerset, they reckon the Somerset economy has lost £1.2 million. That's probably quite a low estimate. What do you want to be done? What do you want to do in your constituency?
Well, I met with the area manager of the Environment Agency just before Christmas, and we discussed how they were tackling the problems. And I met with him again at the end of, it was the end of last week, when he was sort of reporting back. And the good news is that by the end of March, the defences on the Humber will be restored to where they were at the beginning of December. What we've now got to look at is a longer-term strategy to prevent a reoccurrence.
So that's just repairing the damage done in September?
Yeah. Yeah, they've spent £650,000 on the Humber so far, and that will get closer to £1 million, I guess, by the end of March.
But what you really want is defences that will stop the damage done in September from being done.
I mean, in the great scheme of things, we were very fortunate, and the work that's been done since the Great Surge of 1953 has paid off in as much as the damage was considerably less than that. But clearly, with these events happening more often, more work needs to be done, and I shall be meeting with the Environment Agency at a public meeting in Barrow to report back in the near future.
Further sort of infrastructure investments in this area, on the south bank of the Humber, is the possibility of a high-speed train link to London. At the moment, it takes us 2 hours to get to Doncaster by train, puttering along in a vehicle that would go faster if we got out and pushed. There's a possibility of being in London in 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Yeah, to be fair, it's not quite 2 hours to get to Doncaster. I do it every week.
But
it is the best part of three and a quarter hours to King's Cross at the moment. A direct service is something I've been campaigning on since I was elected 4 years ago. The new franchise is coming up for the East Coast. We may get a slot in that. But the good news is that Alliance Rail, through their new GNER offshoot, is looking to provide 4 trains each way a day with new rolling stock, but we've got a long bureaucratic procedure to go through before that. But it's great progress.
And this is not going to be happening before 2017.
No, unless we manage to get this slot in the main East Coast franchise, which the new franchise holder begins their services next February, and it's just possible we might get at least 1 train in that, but it's a slim chance.
There's a little bit of a problem, though, isn't there? Apart from the time it takes to make new rolling stock, the Hitachi Super Express, rather grandly named, the East Coast Line can accommodate 125-mile-per-hour trains, and in order to get to Grimsby, from Grimsby to London, you need to be going at 140. So the line needs to be rebuilt.
Well, there is an upgrade. A lot of money has been spent on the East Coast Main Line. We've been focusing a lot on HS2, but in actual fact, over the next 5 years, the government is spending £38 billion on upgrading the rest of the network. But I acknowledge work needs to be done. We certainly need to speed up the stretch, the 50 miles between here and Doncaster.
But the HS2 is sucking up an awful lot of that money in order to save, 20 minutes on a trip to
Well, it's not
Birmingham.
taking any of the £38 billion. The £38 billion is separate.
Well, can we not separate a little of the HS2 fund and give that to the rest of the infrastructure as well?
There is a 14 billion contingency within the 42 billion that's projected for HS2. I suspect the government will not spend 14 billion or perhaps even anything like it. It's a very generous figure. But it's not, the important thing is it's not taking any investment away from the rest of the network.
More infrastructure still, and this perhaps isn't quite as directly touching on your remit as sitting on the Transport Select Committee, but there has very recently been petitions submitted to Parliament by Associated British Ports trying to cause some sort of, well, it's a delaying tactic for the development of the Able renewable energy servicing plant at Killingholme.
Yeah.
ABP wants to build the Immingham Western Deepwater Jetty, and that would get in the way of Able's AMEP turbines development. There is the so-called Killingholme Triangle,
Yes.
which both companies want to use. Both industries very valuable here. How do you resolve this?
Well, it will be resolved by a special parliamentary procedure, which is a rather long drawn-out process, hopefully less than a year. The government have given the OK for the Able development, and clearly the area needs the jobs and investment that come with it. But equally, we don't want to do anything that jeopardises the ABP operations, which already provide lots of jobs. So it's a delicate balance, but there will now be a special parliamentary committee made up of 3 members of the Commons and 3 from the Lords who will decide the ultimate outcome.
And how would you like to see it resolved? What outcome would you like?
Well, I say it is now a commercial dispute between the two companies. I want to see ABP thrive and the Able project to go ahead. Whether there is a compromise, well, certainly a compromise as I understand it on the table, but whether there's an acceptable compromise to both parties, hopefully they can agree before it gets to Parliament again.
And well, so what's the timetable there? When is it likely to come
Well,
to Parliament?
the order has been laid before Parliament already, and the petition against the order will be lodged next week. So and then there will be a committee, and I'm afraid it will take quite a few months as yet.
Far from Parliament here in Grimsby and in Cleethorpes, there's great controversy about Channel 4's proposition to film a programme called Skint, which examines people without any money and the causes for that, perhaps. There's great resistance to that in Grimsby. Would you like to see that programme banned from Grimsby?
Well, most certainly. What we want for Grimsby, Cleethorpes, North East Links as a whole is good news, and this is a bad news story, and it's a bad news story that could be filmed in any town up and down the country. There are pockets of deprivation and so on, sadly, in every town. It's unfortunate that Channel 4 seems to be focusing on us.
Well, but it's a bad news story, but it's a true story. You can't resist storytellers, filmmakers, documentary makers who are telling a truth. I mean, they've got to film it somewhere. If this is the story they want to tell, it's not as if they're...
Yeah,
every town is going to feel picked upon, but it's a true story. Why resist the telling of the truth?
I don't want to resist the telling of the truth, but and I acknowledge there are problems within the Grimsby Cleethorpes area. There are in every town up and down the land. For obvious reasons, I'd much rather see them focus on the problems in another area. We've got a good news to sell in Grimsby and Cleethorpes. We've just outlined one of them, the potential for the Able, the new train services. We've got a great tourist resort. We've won the In Bloom competition time and again in recent years. So let's, I want to focus on the positive.
Poor old Scunthorpe, just up the road, has had the skint treatment before. Has it done them any harm?
Well, it won't have done them any good. Let's put it like that. On the other hand, things are doing reasonably well in Scunthorpe. They're getting the new technical college and so on. So it's not all bad news down the road. And
they say that the making of this programme has perhaps encouraged some sort of development in Scunthorpe, some sort of investment.
Oh, I've not seen that particular angle on the story, but if that's the case, every cloud has a silver lining.
Okay, in that case, we'll have to go to a break there. Back in a moment, though. Please join us in a couple of seconds. Welcome back. I'm with Martin Vickers, Conservative Member of Parliament for Cleethorpes and Immingham. Martin, in your own party this week, you may have been a bit disappointed by the Chancellor of Germany. Angela Merkel was here and said that it was unlikely that there was a possibility of a renegotiation of Britain's role in the European Union. You want to get Britain out of the European Union anyway. but this is bad news for your leader, your Prime Minister.
It wasn't entirely bad news if you sort of analyse the speech from beginning to end. There were a few concessions to her host, but clearly she wasn't going to give her negotiating position away now any more than any other members of the EU are.
Well, she doesn't need to have much of a negotiating position. She's the most powerful politician in the continent, and it's pretty much whatever she says goes.
Well, we don't know what she will be saying in 18 months' time. That will be the crucial thing. Germany, as Mrs. Merkel made very clear yesterday, want to retain the UK as members of the EU. They will, I think, I won't say they'll do everything to keep us in, but I don't think a concession here and there is beyond them if and when the time comes.
But from your own political point of view, presumably it's a good thing if they don't want to negotiate, because the Prime Minister said that he'll try to renegotiate the position, and if that fails, then there'll be a referendum about whether or not Britain remains in the European Union. You'd like the referendum anyway.
I'd like a referendum anyway, as you say, and I think the important thing is that a Conservative government will deliver that referendum, which the country clearly needs. And it's a perfectly reasonable policy to say, look, we'll renegotiate the position, we'll have an in-out referendum based on that. And I don't rule out the fact that there will be some concessions, perhaps not for most, but certainly the Parliamentary Conservative Party are very, a growing number of them have said they will oppose continued membership if we don't get concessions.
But why would Angela Merkel really worry about that? It's polite of her to come and have tea with the Queen and say, please stay in. But the purpose of the European Union fundamentally is to stop Germany and France going to war every generation. They don't need us.
Well, a lot is made of the difficulties that we've experienced in the last century, and obviously not wanting to repeat them. I don't think that 60 years on there's any real serious possibility of a war in Europe between the major powers.
Well, you say that at a time when a large European country about the size of France is possibly about to start tearing itself to pieces. European war in the 1990s, we saw warfare in the Balkans, and now we're seeing warfare on the shores of the Black Sea in the Ukraine.
But I don't think anyone is seriously suggested that the major powers in Europe are on the point of conflict, and whether or not we're in the EU, there will still be a very close economic ties between us, which is particularly important. And equally, of course, I know Hitler came to power democratically, but the reality is that there is a very soundly based democracy in Germany now.
I wasn't suggesting that there would be another Franco-Prussian war, as it were, but what model then of relationship with Europe would you prefer? A Swiss model, a Norwegian model?
Well, I'd actually prefer a model that didn't include a political union and a much less regulated form of tying our economies together. The British people were sold the common market, as it was then called at the time of the 1975 referendum, on the basis that it was a trading agreement. Anyone who bothered to read the 1957 Treaty of Rome knew that the political union was the objective. We were conned, to be perfectly honest, by the Harold Wilsons, the Roy Jenkins,
the Edward Heaths,
and the Edward Heaths, Jim Callaghan's, Tony Crosslands of the day.
You mentioned the possibility of political union, but there's another political union that might well be disintegrating. In the last few weeks, the Scots have been told that they can't use the pound, or at least they won't have the blessing of the Bank of England or the Treasury if they use the pound, or any influence on the pound's value. And the European Union have said that they're not necessarily welcome there. The European Union is clearly quite in the mood for chucking people out if they don't want to play. The Scottish question gets more and more complicated. The currency especially. What happens to Scotland if they do go independent and they have no influence over the pound?
Well, clearly the first priority of Alex Salmond when he initiated this process was to become a member of the euro. The Eurozone then went up in flames. He fell back on a plan B cobbled together in a rush and said, oh, well, we'll keep the pound. not really bothering to consult the rest of the UK. We then see what was clearly a concerted show of opposition from the Chancellor, from the Shadow Chancellor and from the Chief Liberal spokesman. We then had the Governor of the Bank and the President of the EU ploughing into the argument. And
the Cabinet Secretary, very unusual.
And indeed the Cabinet Secretary.
Civil servant.
So I think the pressure is really on now on the politicians, Alex Salmond and his team. I can't see the Scottish people being lulled into some sort of compromise. I suspect, but I'm no expert on this. I suspect there will be a majority against leaving the union, although it might be slimmer than we would have hoped.
But your instincts must be with the Independence Party. You're a nationalist wishing to leave a supranational union in Europe. We must understand nationalists in Scotland wishing to leave a supra-kingdom in these islands.
Well, I can understand the arguments. I just don't think, unlike in the case of our removing from the EU, that the argument stacks up. Industry has also weighed in this week by saying we'll be moving our headquarters. There's the arguments about defence and so on. I think only those who are sort of ideologically inclined to independence and the purity of the Scottish identity will actually vote for independence. Alex Salmond wanted the Devo Max option on the ballot paper. That's the vote he could probably have won. Once that was off, I think the likelihood is much less.
We have local and European elections coming up imminently in the next few months now. And one of the threats to all the established parties, the three main established ancient parties, is UKIP. They're becoming surprisingly popular, aren't they?
Not surprisingly popular, really, because they are a populist party. I agree with many of the sentiments that UKIP and its supporters have, but the reality is we have an electoral system that is designed for the two-party system. It can just about creak along with 40 or 50 Liberals as a maximum, but once a fourth party enters the fray and starts taking a share of the vote which might reach double figures, then results become very unpredictable.
So you have a first past the post voting system, which has traditionally most of the time ensured a majority government in the House of Commons. So if UKIP is successful, will that ironically make the British Parliament look more like a European Parliament with various splintered parties and no possibility of majority government permanent coalition?
Well, it may result in coalition. It's extremely unlikely to result in any UKIP MPs. You've got to be in the sort of 38% position in the polls to achieve that. The likelihood of them, they'll win, in inverted commas, the Euro elections based on a PR system. That's very likely, but they can do that without a share of their vote in the 20s.
Why? You said they were a populist party. Why are they so popular? Why are the disaffected flocking to UKIP? Why are there so many disaffected?
Well, there's a turn-off from the political process and the traditional political parties, which I acknowledge.
I'll have to stop you there, Martin Vickers. Thank you so much, as always. Please join us next time for the next hot topic. See you then. Goodbye.